Thanks everybody for joining. Just going to give you a brief introductory presentation to get us going and explain a bit about the workshop. And then you'll get a chance to have your say as well. So the agenda for tonight is it's split into 3 sections. I'll be introducing you to the project process, what we've heard so far, and briefly describe the 4 forest management scenario options. Around 6:20-ish, we'll aim to split up into 3 discussion groups. So each of those discussion groups will have a facilitator and a note taker, and we'll have about actually over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes or so in those breakout rooms. And then the last 20 minutes we'll come back together in the main room, and facilitators will give us some highlights about the discussions that they had in their groups, and we'll talk about next steps. The Municipal Forest Reserve is not like most other community forests because the municipality owns the land. It's not leased from the province. It's not under a forest license or a permit. So while provincial laws apply, obviously the municipality has quite a bit of control over what happens in the MFR. The MFR is about 5,000 hectares and 25% of the land base of North Cowichan. It's been managed for timber harvesting since 1946, and it does provide some revenue to the municipality as that. Large sections of the MFR are within the coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone. It is a unique set of ecosystems that are only located within this narrow strip of Southeast Vancouver Island, parts of the Gulf Islands, and pockets of the south coast and mainland of British Columbia. And most of the global range of this biogeoclimatic zone is in Canada. There's a wide variety of ecosystems, so not just Douglas fir forests, but Garry oak ecosystems, wetlands, and shorelines, and a fair number of species at risk. The coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone is also one of the smallest and most at-risk zones in BC because of the amount of human impacts and the small size. It's also home to a high number of species and ecosystems at risk. There are also popular hiking and mountain biking trails in several areas of the MFR. And the municipality does promote trail opportunities and has a new trails app that highlights forestry roads and sanctioned trails as well in the MFR. Map on the right here just shows the 6 different mountains and then a number of other parcels that are managed by the Forestry Department of North Cowichan. So the project, back in 2019, community members brought their concerns about harvesting of the MFR to council, and in response, council decided to pause timber harvesting to both review the management of the MFR and provide opportunities for community engagement. So this project started in 2020 with the first round of engagement taking place about a year ago in 2021. And we're now in the second round of engagement. And after this round, we will provide a comprehensive engagement summary to council. And it's anticipated that then council will consider next steps and make a decision about how to move forward with management planning for the MFR. I also want to highlight that in addition to public engagement, there is an MOU between North Cowichan Council and the Cowichan Nation. And as part of that, there are ongoing discussions and sharing of information through that, but it is under a separate process. So in the first round of engagement, we heard about all the different things people value about the Municipal Forest Reserve. Some people shared what they value about forests in general as well. And all of that feedback was used by the UBC Partnership Group to develop the 4 forest management scenario options that we are going to be discussing tonight. In that first round, there was quite a bit of outreach done by North Cowichan, newspaper ads, social media, print ads, email updates, and Twitter posts. And it yielded a really good participation. There were over 1,000 online survey responses, 110 people participated in the online workshops. And we also had some interviews and participation from community members who helped us with the community engagement process. And I just want to highlight some of the key takeaways. For a more complete summary, you can look at the engagement summary report from round 1. And I also did a council presentation on that last year, about January of 2022. So what we heard was about the importance of protecting and enhancing ecological benefits of MFR. Many expressed concern about the health of the forest and indicated that ecosystem services provided by the forest really should outweigh the potential revenue from harvesting. Many expressed that the MFR is a valuable recreational asset as well, and are in favor of forest management that supports hiking, biking, walking, ATVing, and horseback riding. There's also significant support for recreation as it relates to tourism. Many community members also expressed concern about harvesting practices, and particularly the impact of clear cutting. Some people felt that the cut blocks negatively impact views of the mountains, impact recreational experiences, and as well as the ecological health of the forest. Some participants are supportive of the current management of the MFR, but also within that group, there were some who supported a shift towards ecoforestry and more sustainable forms of harvesting, while they did support harvesting in general. There were also concerns about climate change, the impacts of wildfires and flooding and extreme weather events on the forest, but also the importance of the forest as a way to increase resiliency to climate change. There were a wide range of perspectives on the cultural significance of the MFR, and many noted the importance of the forest for recreation, access to nature, health and well-being, as well as education. Some respondents also expressed the importance of consulting the Cowichan Nation on the future management of the MFR. And finally, there was throughout, I think, interest in seeing more details and to get engaged with the trade-offs so that everybody could make informed choices about the right direction for the community. So where we are now, the UBC Partnership Group has developed 4 scenarios, as you probably all know. And in round 2 of engagement, this is the third of 3 public sessions to provide some more information, to allow discussions. There's also an online survey available that is open through December 31st of this year. And then there's also a statistically valid survey that's happening. That's a representative sample of the community. In now to a brief overview, and you can have more discussion about these scenarios in the small groups, but I just wanted to get everybody on the same page. So UBC Partnership Group developed these 4 scenarios to encompass the spectrum all the way from business as usual, which is the status quo, scenario 1, through to sort of a hands-off conservation approach represented by scenario 4. Each of these scenarios was modeled and scored based on several criteria that reflected the values that we heard in that first round of engagement. So I'll go through each of these on the following slides and talk a bit more about how they were evaluated and compared. The status quo option, scenario 1, it's really the baseline. So essentially all of the MFR would be considered for harvesting, with older stands harvested first, and with the minimum age for harvesting at trees that are 60 years old and stands that are 60 years old. Harvesting would take place in cut blocks with about 15% of trees retained. The pie chart on this diagram here shows how well this scenario scores in terms of each of the criteria that relate to values. So as you can see, timber revenue in this scenario, the score is very good. It's 8 out of 8, while carbon, revenue from carbon credit sales is very poor. Then in terms of the other options, visually sensitive areas, even though retention would be higher, maybe up to 55%, in this modeling evaluation, it was noted that the visual quality goals are not likely to be met. I'll also highlight that much of the historic harvesting has been on the backsides of mountains, has not necessarily had a significant visual impact, and future harvesting areas are likely to be more visible. The scenario scores the lowest in the area of visual quality. In other criteria, it scores often, around 4 out of 8 or lower. Those are the yellow and the orange here. And on the left here, you can see the total estimated revenue over 30 years is about $31.4 million. All of that from timber harvesting. The reduced harvesting option brings the amount of harvesting down to about 40% compared to scenario 1. That's a significant reduction in annual harvesting. Also, the visual quality criteria is a bit better than scenario 1 because harvesting would be done with smaller openings, greater retention within each of the cut blocks, as well as greater retention in visually sensitive areas. There is some revenue from selling carbon offsets in this scenario with an average over 30 years of 22.2 million. But there also remains a significant amount of revenue from timber harvesting, so 8.5 million over 30 years. Overall, in most criteria, the scenario scores, 5 or 6 out of 8. It's not great. It's not terrible in any one category. It's kind of what you would expect from a sort of half and half harvesting and carbon credit approach. Also just wanted to note that the revenue is not significantly lower, but about the same as scenario 1 at around 30 million. The active conservation scenario 3, really shifts the focus of management fully away from timber harvesting as a source of revenue. Harvesting would only occur to benefit biodiversity and forest health. There are opportunities in the forest as it is now to, for example, thin some stands so that the remaining trees become larger faster and encourage old forest characteristics to develop, or there could be harvesting of conifers in more open woodland areas to mimic natural fire cycles. There are no timber harvest revenues in this scenario essentially because harvesting would not be the most valuable timber. It would be for these ecological values. Also, the cost of harvesting practices would be higher just because you're not doing cut blocks, you're not doing large areas, so it's less efficient. The potential for revenue from carbon credits is much higher than scenario 1 or 2, and that's where the majority of the revenue comes from in this scenario. Again, you can see like the ecological and the social scores are quite high for this scenario, and timber revenue is very poor. Finally, passive conservation, similar to scenario 3, but in this scenario, there wouldn't be thinning of stands or managing conifers in open woodland areas. It would be let nature take its course, heal itself, and let the forest do what it's going to do. And you can see there are really high scores in the ecological and the social aspects criteria. And in terms of the economics, all of the revenue would be from carbon credits as well, and there would be zero revenue from timber harvesting. Just in terms of comparing and contrasting the 4 scenarios, this table summarizes each of the 3 ecological, economic, and social criteria and averages them together, and then gives you an average overall score. Active and passive conservation scored the highest in terms of the ecological criteria. Scenarios 1 and 2 scored the highest in terms of the economic aspects. And just wanted to mention that this is primarily because revenue from timber harvesting would be more immediate, whereas the revenue benefits of carbon credits, as my understanding, would take time to develop. From a social perspective, things like wilderness recreation and visual quality, scenarios 3 and 4 scored highest. And overall, looking at the average scores and assuming that each of the criteria has the same weight, scenarios 3 and 4 scored the highest. That's the quick summary of the scenarios. And almost out of time, but I just want to touch on a couple of frequently asked questions that we've gotten already, and maybe this will answer some people's questions right off the bat. The best place to go for information is the Connect North Cowichan webpage. It has a place where you can ask questions online. And because this is such a kind of a complex and technical review, we're not going to be able to necessarily answer all questions tonight or immediately. So that's another place where you can ask questions if things come up later. We'll also be collecting questions that we hear tonight and adding them to that page as well. So some of the questions about details of the forest modeling, I'll point you to the discussion guide as well as the presentation that Dr. Brad Seeley gave to Council in September. There's a link on that Connect North Cowichan page. There are big questions about how the forest harvesting will be done, where roads would be, where harvesting would be done, and what it would look like. Those types of decisions will really be made once the overall direction is set, as really the scenario and the direction that's set will determine what those approaches and locations would look like. They would be different under each scenario. And those details aren't worked out yet. They will be worked out in a future forest management plan. In terms of the visual impacts, the scenarios do evaluate visual quality, and that scoring is based on how well the scenarios meet provincial visual quality standards. There have also been lots of questions about the economic impacts and the assumptions. So the financial assumptions for timber harvesting were based on historic records for the MFR, as well as developed in cooperation with Sean Mason, the municipal forester. Carbon credit revenue assumptions were based on market reviews that included some current and actual projects, and the startup and maintenance costs were included. For more information and to dive deep into how those programs work, there is a carbon feasibility study from 2020 that's available on the North Cowichan webpage if you want to better understand that. We also want to recognize that some people want to know how the Quitsim Nation is involved and what the direction will be. Leading from those conversations, I don't have any information to share on that. That process is underway, and I don't think there's any conclusions or things available to share. So that's an initiative of council directly, and I anticipate that they will share with you once those discussions happen. So I think I'm doing pretty well on time here. So tonight's one way you can participate. We'll be dividing into breakout rooms in a moment. After this session, please go to the North Cowichan, connect northcowichan.ca to explore the resources and information there. You can also complete the online survey. There's also a representative survey being conducted by Mustel Group, which I mentioned. So please answer your phone and participate. If you get a call from them, it should show up as on your caller ID as Mustel Group. And a little bit about how we're going to go now. You will be assigned to a breakout room randomly, and you should get sent there automatically. But if a little notification pops up that asks you to join a room, please click join.